Hi, Fortunato Pezzimenti here. I'm the former producing director of Irish Classical Theatre Company, and at the moment I'm retired from that, and we'll look forward to directing as a freelance director, hopefully with Irish Classical as it goes on this new adventure. Vincent talks about our first meeting, and it was indeed at the bomb shelter after a production of the Scottish play by Toy Company and directed by Meg Pantera. Vincent tells a story that it was at intermission, I think he said. I have a recollection that it was after the show. But I remember being so taken by his power and presence, and also the gift of language that he had. Certainly it was very striking, and I made that comment to him after. I'm not sure how we eventually connected after that, but we each certainly had a distinct impression of each other. But from that point on, we went on to do The Caretaker at the Pfeiffer Theater, and also Long Day's Journey into Night. That was a co-production with the UB, I believe that was it. Yes, and Saul Elkin, of course, was featured in that also. From that point on, it must have been something that I did in Long Day's Journey into Night. Vincent suggested that I joined him as they looked to find a new home on Chippewa Street as an associate artistic director. So I thought that was a fantastic opportunity to direct and to be connected with one company. Up to that point, I had been directing maybe one show a year for various companies, and so this seemed like an ideal proposition. However, at the same time, the toy company, if this is my recollection, and Vincent remembered this before I even did, the toy company asked me to be their artistic director at that time. So I had to make a choice between that and coming on board as an associate artistic director. At the time, I was teaching at the Performing Arts School, so I thought being a full-time artistic director would just be way, way too much work for me with the given the job at Performing Arts. And then in 1993, I was invited by UB's theater department to start teaching voice at UB. So I said no to that at Toy and came on board with Vincent as an associate artistic director. It was not a paying job. I didn't report to the office. I worked primarily performing arts, and then I was working at UB twice a week. So that became a little bit of a burden in that respect. So in 1993, the opening show for Irish Classical Theatre on Chippewa was Seamarks. And we wanted to find a two-hander for Josephine and Vincent, since they were certainly the visible icons of the company, of course, along with Chris O'Neill at the time. So we decided to do Seamarks. We found this play. We were quite surprised by the literature, the writing of Gardner McKay. And it turned out to be a wonderful production. It received a 5-star review. It featured Josephine, as I said, and Vincent, and Terry Doran went on and on about it, kind of established the early reputation of the company. Subsequent to that as a director with the company, I ended up directing, I would say, some 50 shows for Irish Classical, and during that time, it offered me such an opportunity to come into contact with all these fabulous writers. And being a research buff, part of the joy of directing is visiting locations, or I became a fan of the New York State Performing Arts Library, which I would go quite often to do research, and I totally enjoyed that part of it. For example, with A Sweet Bird of Youth, I went down to New Orleans and had a tour, a personal guided tour of New Orleans, and where Tennessee Williams tended to frequent. That was illuminating. Even saw the street where Desire is mentioned and where Tennessee Williams lived up above. Anyway, from that we went on to collaborate with, for example, Next to Normal, we collaborated with the Western New York Mental Health Association. We had talks in the theater about bipolar issues at the time. So it became a very meaningful collaboration and production. Also, I think I'd be remiss if I just didn't mention the three productions I directed with the Buffalo Philharmonic, with the Bourgeois Gentleman, the success of Amadeus, and the most recent huge success of Midsummer Night's Dream with Joanne Falletta, the Buffalo Philharmonic. It's an association that we at the theater have known for a long time. Before I actually directed there, Vincent had had numerous experiences with certain pieces with the Buffalo Philharmonic. So we hope, as Kate takes us on, that that relationship will continue to endure, because it is such an exciting process for the actors to be up on that stage with that divine orchestra behind it. So I do have to tell you a story about our days back in the, not the round, but the oval at the Calumet over there on Chippewa Street. I think it had to be, no, maybe it wasn't the first season. I don't think it was. But we did a production of the Geely concert by Tom Murphy, incidentally one of my favorite Irish writers. And I had directed the Geely concert. And there was a particular evening that I wasn't at the production, but there's a scene where Vincent's character is a businessman, but somehow not fulfilled. And so he has this idea that he wants to sing like Geely, Beniamino Geely, the Italian tenor. So he goes to this therapist who is a bit down and out, and is explaining his problem to him. And in one session, he decides that I have to bring a cut of Geely singing so the therapist, who is played by Richard West, would recognize why I'm so consumed with Geely. So the therapist is in the office, scene opens up, he's in the office, and in walks Vincent's character with the album, and he's about to, he goes over to the record, opens up the record player, and goes to take out the album, and the disc is not, the LP, is not in the cover. And so Vincent has to really react and think in the moment. And he said, well, listen, I think I left, I'm going to make up something here, I think I left the album itself in the car, so, or in the back room or wherever. So he leaves the stage, and meanwhile, Richard is out there having to improvise while Vincent is looking for the record backstage. So Vincent finally comes back in. He hasn't been able to find the record. He scoured backstage, and if you have him tell you the story, he can tell you what he went through. And at that moment, he says, well, I don't have the record itself, but I've decided I'm going to sing the aria for you. And Richard just looks at him. He's back on the couch. He puts his hands behind his head, crosses his ankles, and said, oh, really? And Vincent breaks into some Italian, fettuccine linguine, I don't know what that he was saying. And he called me at school. I was at Performing Arts. He told me the story. And I have to say I was in tears laughing at the circumstance that he had caught himself in, and would have loved to hear him sing in Italian. Anna K. France was there, I think, at the time, and she said she noticed nothing that happened. In any case, I could probably go on for quite a few minutes about that, but I just want to move on to Kate and how delighted we all are that Kate has assumed leadership of this company. I first met Kate when I taught voice at UB, I think it was the early 2000s. And there were two students of mine whose journaling and voice work were just outstanding, and I never forgot them. One was Kate LeConte, and the other was Kristen Tripp Kelly. And they both were certainly prominent in my response to them as future theater people. And here we are, some 20 years later or so, and Kate LeConte is assuming the role of the mantle of artistic director, while Kristen Tripp Kelly has acted for us and is just a wonderful, beautiful actress. So good luck, Kate. We wish you well, and we wish you well in the next 27 years.